I am Ken Gale. I produce and host an environmental radio show on WBAI every other Tuesday evening. There's flyers on the freebie table for the show. Were any of the hurricanes that we're having right now, were any of them caused by climate change, global warming, climate chaos? Yes. Which one? That is totally the wrong question to ask. Abby Hafer, who wrote a wonderful book on unintelligent design, she compared it to baseball. 10 years ago or 20 years ago, whenever that was, when baseball players were taking a lot of steroids, they were hitting a lot more home runs. And nobody said, was that home run caused by steroids? Was that one caused by performance-enhancing drugs? Nobody asked that. They would say they're hitting more home runs because they're taking these performance-enhancing drugs. And the home runs they're hitting are going further. That's what you ask about hurricanes. The hurricanes are more powerful than they used to be because we're adding energy to the globe through greenhouse gases and directly through nuclear power. So the hurricanes are more powerful and there's more of them. More tropical storms become hurricanes because there's more energy for them to draw upon. So that's the connection between climate chaos and hurricanes. Greenhouse gases are gases like carbon dioxide and methane, and there's a few others, water vapor, nitrous oxide. And when the sun goes through those molecules, some of the light becomes heat, and that heats the globe. Just as when light goes through the roof of a greenhouse, the light becomes heat, and the heat is trapped within the greenhouse because the wavelengths are different, so the heat doesn't go back up through the roof of the greenhouse. That is why you can walk into a greenhouse when it's 1 degree out and the greenhouse is sweltering hot. They have to vent greenhouses in the winter because they get so hot. That's how efficient greenhouse roofs are. That is what methane and carbon dioxide are doing to our Earth. They're heating the oceans, which is almost 3/4 of the globe. They're heating them a lot. Hurricanes form through several things. One is that you'll have storms on the Sahara Desert in Africa. And the sand that comes off of these storms is what water vapor condenses on to form clouds and form thunder clouds. When a lot of thunder clouds start to coalesce, you've got a tropical storm. When the tropical storm becomes more powerful, you have a hurricane. And that's all that's happening. Now the El Ninos and La Ninas modify what those tropical storms and hurricanes do after they develop. How far across the Atlantic Ocean do they do before they go north? That depends on what else is happening in the atmosphere. El Ninos and La Ninas are natural occurrences. They have a cycle of 3 to 7 years. Well, 3 to 7 years, 7 is more than twice 3. So cycle is probably not the right word, but the point is they happen. We are changing the world's climate, so the El Nino and La Nina cycles are changing. Tom Weissmuller, who's a meteorologist I have on Ecologic to predict the winter weather every year, I had him on this year to talk about the upcoming summer weather. I had him back in June. And I had just read an article that they were expecting a very powerful El Nino to develop over the Pacific Ocean. When a El Nino develops, you have a whole lot of heat condensing over the eastern Pacific Ocean near the equator. And then the trade winds, because the Earth is going from west to east, so the winds are going from east to west, pushes that hot water toward the Philippines. And then what it'll do is it'll hit the Philippines and slosh back, like any water does. And A La Nina is a cooler effect. And in fact, I would like to read one of my favorite definitions of El Niños from Mike Novacek. He has a few interesting things in here. El Nino has wide-ranging effects, including a rise in the surface temperature of much of equatorial Pacific, a shift in winds and current patterns, and the suppression of upwelling of cold, nutrient-rich water in the eastern Pacific off the coast of South America. Global warming may strengthen its effects, but is not necessarily causing global warming. A La Nina is cooler. Tom Weissmuller feels that the air pollution from China, especially the soot, is coming over the Pacific Ocean and cooled the Pacific Ocean. And that is why the predicted El Nino in the beginning of 2017, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is what the Weather Service is part of, was predicting a strong El Nino in 2017. And as the year went by, their prediction of the likelihood of a strong El Nino went lower and lower and lower. There's a lot of pollution coming out of China, and it is literally blocking the sun's light. So the Pacific Ocean is cooler than otherwise predicted because of this pollution. The Atlantic Ocean, however, is really, really warm. So therefore, those tropical storms are more likely to become hurricanes. And when I re-listened to Tom's show to prepare for speaking to you tonight, he predicted that a rare event was going to happen this summer, which is a hurricane developing in the Gulf of Mexico. Usually they develop in the Atlantic Ocean, not the Gulf of Mexico. And that happened. That is how warm the water has been. You may remember Katrina went over Florida, lost energy when it went over Florida, went over the Gulf of Mexico and gained energy because the Gulf of Mexico was so warm, right? This is all energy. It's kind of a transfer of energy from the south to the north. Hurricanes moving from the south to the north. And La Ninas are so high that they don't affect, they don't cut a thunderstorm cloud in half like an El Nino does. They modify the jet stream immensely. And I should tell you a little bit about the book I just read from. Terra by Mike Novacek. Now, he's a paleontologist at the Museum of Natural History. He's also vice president at the museum. So I'm attending a press opening, and he's talking about having written a book about climate change. And so I asked him, what's a paleontologist doing writing a book about climate change? You know, you study old things, and this is how we're going on now. And he said, as a paleontologist, I study extinctions. I know what they look like. There are certain climatic aspects that happen during extinctions. We're having one now. So he had a lot of information to give from his point of view. We are able to measure how much oxygen and carbon dioxide were in the atmosphere millions of years ago. And lo and behold, during these extinctions, the carbon dioxide level was way higher than normal, like it is now. And indeed, there are a lot of extinctions going on right now. This extinction is not caused by the continents moving. It's not caused by volcanoes. It's not caused by a meteorite or a comet hitting the Earth. It's caused by humans. It's caused by Western man, I'll have to add. It's certainly not being caused by the third world. And it's very important to know that.
Except China, which has now become...
Yeah. I guess China has always been called the third world, and I don't know if it still should be. Undeveloped. Southern countries and northern countries. That's very true. And Winston Churchill said back in World War II, before the U.S. entered the war, that Americans will always do the right thing. after they've exhausted every other possibility. And in reading all these articles about bomb trains, right? We can't give up this addiction to fossil fuel. So we have bomb trains, and we have exploding pipelines, and we have destruction of water supplies all over. It's like, have we finally exhausted every other possibility? No, we haven't. No, we haven't. I don't quote from this book a lot. A lot of environmentalists do. Naomi Klein, This Changes Everything. It's a climate change 101 book for the most part. But there's a very interesting chapter on geoengineering. And I don't like to talk about geoengineering on WBAI because there are a lot of conspiracy theorists on WBAI who say things that without checking their facts. I won't mention any names. And there are also people who prefer to blame the government chemtrails for climate change. And I'm sorry, but our lifestyle is a big contributor to climate change. And in fact, those chemtrails may very well be the geoengineering that Naomi Klein is talking in here. And she's not coming from a point of view of conspiracy theorists. She's talking about the Environmental Defense Fund and the Royal Society in England, one of the most prestigious scientific organizations in the world. And a scientific organization, World Science, they had a conference. They had a conference in England, and it was the World Academy of Sciences and the Royal Society and EDF about geoengineering. They're taking it very, very seriously. And one of the things they want to do with this geoengineering is spray sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. Because sulfur dioxide is supposed to reflect some of the sun's radiation back into space. They seem to, reading that chapter and reading the various quotes she has when she interviewed people who were at this conference, the only aspect of climate chaos that they seem to even think about is global warming. Global warming is one aspect of climate chaos, and only one aspect. But that's the only aspect they seem to know about. Sulfur dioxide, when you put it into the air, you add some water vapor, and now you have sulfuric acid. So that's what they're doing to the atmosphere of the Earth. They're putting sulfuric acid into the air. The scientific organizations that I'm talking about and various world governments, this is supposedly in the talking stages, but possibly the chemtrails are involved with that. We don't know because they won't talk about the chemtrails. Who talks about chemtrails? Some of the craziest people on WBAI talk about the chemtrails, so I won't do it. I'm doing it here because I'm with you, and of course now Joe's got it on tape. But the point is, it is amazing that we haven't exhausted every possibility. And if you spray sulfuric acid, I'm not going to call sulfur dioxide, it sounds too benign. If you put sulfuric acid in the northern hemisphere, it has one effect on global climate. If you put it in the southern hemisphere, it has another effect on global climate. And in fact, if you are trying to improve the northern climate with sulfuric acid, it makes the southern climate worse. So what in the world is going to stop if the United States and Europe are putting sulfuric acid into the air in the northern hemisphere? Why wouldn't Australia want to put it in the southern hemisphere to put their climate back? So now you're adding more acid to the rain and more acid to the oceans. And you've got the base of the food chain is being killed by the acidity of the ocean. Now, most of the acidity of the ocean is caused by the carbon dioxide, which goes into the ocean and becomes carbonic acid. It is literally dissolving some of the plankton, the base of the food chain in the ocean. Literally dissolving it. There was a wonderful movie called A Sea Change, which came out years ago. I did a show about it years ago wonderful movie talking about the sea butterflies, which is one of the creatures whose shells are dissolving because of ocean acidification. And he does a wonderful job of talking about public policy. A lot of these people who make movies about the environment never talk about public policy because they're afraid they'll never get another grant if they talk about public policy. Sea Change talks about public policy. They talk about solutions, different energy sources, for crying out loud. And they have one, the person who's narrating it, his motivation was to help his grandson have a better world to live in. And he's of Norwegian descent, and he goes to Norway. And there's these giant machines that, as the waves hit these machines, it converts the mechanical energy of the wave into electricity. Giant machines, all right? They look like Jack Kirby designed them, all right? Those of you know who know any people that Barry and I would have been talking about. And the punchline is that these machines were built and designed in the United States. But they are nowhere used in the United States. No, they're used in Norway. All right? Yeah, we have waves here. I'm sure you've all seen ocean waves. We have them here. We could turn that into electricity, but we don't do that. It's really amazing what is going on. And there's another thing to help you address climate deniers. Again, quoting from Terra, because climate deniers love to confuse climate variation and climate change, right? And I love his explanation. Climate change means a large-scale shift in regional, continental, or global climate extending over a short or long time. The change is directional. It does not automatically or easily reverse to initial conditions. Climate variations, by contrast, refers to rhythmic oscillations in conditions. The climate changes, but then changes back to what was, from day to day, season to season, or year to year. So there's a difference between climate variation and climate change, and the climate deniers love to say they're both the same thing. And one of the ways they love to say they're both the same thing is when they talk about sunspots. Sunspots are cyclical. They have 11 and 22-year cycles, which means when you have more sunspots now, you're going to have less of them years from now. It's going to change back. And if the sunspots are lessening some of the effects of climate chaos, and public policy is made based on those lessening effects, when the sunspots go back to their other cycle, then we have the effects of that and all the gases that we put into the air that nobody paid attention to because, things are not getting that hot. What do people know anything about? And so everything is so complex. La Niñas and El Niños change the way the Gulf Stream works. The jet stream, right? The Gulf Stream is changing due to climate changes also. The way the ice caps are melting, the way the seas are getting warmer, that's changing the Gulf Stream. We're liable to see, again, in a much longer period of time, a massive shrinking of the growing season of Europe. They're going to end up with climate a lot more similar to Canada than they are now. They're the same latitude as Canada, but the Gulf Stream modifies their climate. But as we change the Gulf Stream, we're changing their growing season. They're not going to be able to support the population they're showing. So eco-refugees from Asia and Africa are often going to Europe. And then they're going to have eco-refugees. And I have a feeling this continent we're living on now is going to be one of their places they're going to go to. There's a great science fiction story called Shifting Seas by Stanley Weinbaum that kind of predicted what would happen if there was no Gulf Stream. And fascinating story. It was written in the mid-30s, and he actually prevented World War II in the course of this story, and World War II hadn't happened yet. But it really gives you an idea of what the world would be like without a Gulf Stream, and we're changing that. There's so many other aspects of, let me see now. CNN pointed out that the heat wave out west, all right, it's not just very, very hot and you have to use more air conditioning. It's also grounding airplanes. It's causing wildfires. It's knocking out electricity and causing roads to buckle. All right, when you have 120-degree temperatures for any length of time, all right, it literally messes up the roads itself. Airplanes can't take off. All right, people's lives are being changed due to the changing of climate. And of course, the mass media is scared to death of mentioning that kind of stuff, which is why everybody here should be a supporter of WBAI, by the way. And there is an immense amount of going on. The Weather Channel had an article in April. Generally speaking, there is a link between El Nino and increased wind shear in tropical Atlantic basin. Wind shear limits both the development and strength of tropical cyclones. AccuWeather. When El Nino occurs, it typically creates strong winds from the west at mid-levels of the atmosphere. These winds tend to prevent formation, limit strengthening, and can lead to an early demise of tropical storms. Meanwhile, waters of much of the Atlantic basin have risen above normal in many areas. The temperature of most of these waters is now above average. Warm water, especially when this warmth extends to the depths, helps fuel tropical storms. And the last 392 consecutive months have been hotter than the average temperature globally. 392. That's almost 33 years, right, Talbot? 392 months, almost 33 years. Every single month is hotter than the recorded average. That's globally. Now, I emphasize globally because the climate deniers that go, well, it was cool over here. I said, globally, it was warmer. All right? And 72% of the globe is the ocean. So you're talking about a huge part of the globe being warmer. When the ocean is warmer, hurricanes are stronger. Tropical storms become hurricanes. More thunderstorms coalesce and become tropical storms. More of them. That's the way it comes. And as oceans warm, carbon dioxide and methane comes out of the oceans, which therefore increases the warming of the oceans even more. It is a cycle. And it is a cycle that has gone on in geologic history and killed a lot of species of animals throughout history. It's happened over and over again, and it's happening again. And policy doesn't go with it. Another dot to connect is there's a lot of methane in the frozen ground of the Arctic. The Arctic is melting. The methane is coming out. And so, again, it's another terrible cycle. As the Earth gets warmer, more methane comes out, which warms it more. And what's interesting about methane, it is much worse than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. Now, a lot of the big greens in Washington only want to talk about carbon dioxide and won't talk about methane because some of them still want to sort of say, well, methane, natural gas, is okay. All right? Well, it's not okay. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change from the UN a few years ago had a graph showing how much worse methane was than carbon dioxide. And how much worse it is than carbon dioxide lessens over time. So they have one part of the graph is how much worse it is than carbon dioxide, and then over time is the y component of the graph. And it shows an angle going down as years go by. And they put a dotted line at 10 years and a dotted line at 100 years to show that in 10 years it's 85 times worse. And in 100 years it's like 10 times worse. And they don't say what it is. They don't spell out how much worse methane is than carbon dioxide when it's first emitted, right now. So all the fracking sites, they're sending methane into the atmosphere. What are they doing compared to carbon dioxide, compared to burning that methane? It's 120 times worse. You have to look at the graph and extrapolate. Why in the world are they emphasizing 10 years and 85 times? I think they're trying to make people think that it's 10 years from now. It's bad in 10 years. It's worse now. It's worse now. So yeah, we should not be using methane, and we shouldn't be burning it. Because with the transport of methane, these pipelines leak, which means methane is going into the air. And so it's much worse when it's leaking than it is when you burn it. And it's bad enough when you burn it. Nuclear power plants heat the earth directly because they operate at temperatures of thousands of degrees, and they use cooling water from outside sources, such as, say, the Hudson River in the case of Indian Point. And that heat goes eventually into the ocean. And some of the heat dissipates into the atmosphere. We are heating the earth directly with nuclear power. And what's interesting is a hurricane that went through Florida, Irma. There were 11 nuclear power plants in Irma's path. 11 of them. And as Irma was first approaching Florida, all the utilities said, we're not going to shut off the nuclear power plants. We don't need to. All right? They don't want to. They eventually did shut off some of them. They did not shut off all of them. Just as when Sandy approached New York City, Indian Point was not shut down. Indian Point is 15 miles above sea level, 15 feet above sea level. What's interesting is when I said in the air it's 15 feet above sea level, I got a call from a PR person from Entergy, who owns Indian Point. It's 15.2 feet above sea level. Wanted to make sure I said that 15.2 feet, so I was like, yeah, I said it all right. And they said, well, it's never come higher than 8 feet on our grounds. I said, Westchester has had storm surges of 12 feet without a hurricane. And he's like, no, we're not going to do it. And they are so resistant to shutting down nuclear power plants, hurricane or not. There was a nor'easter that hit the Pilgrim plant in Massachusetts and almost put it into a meltdown. We came really close because nuclear power plants require outside electricity or emergency generators in order to function. In order for the pumps to work, to pump that cooling water, and if you don't keep it cool and it starts getting hot, it melts down and you can't stop it. And the safety equipment has to run outside. You don't want the safety equipment to run on the plant itself, because then if something happens to the plant, no safety equipment. So you have to run it outside. And most of the safety equipment and pumps got knocked out by a nor'easter at Pilgrim in Massachusetts. All right, we came really close. If there had been one more of the safety equipment fail, we would have had Fukushima near Boston. And because it didn't happen, the utilities were like, don't have to worry about it. Don't worry about it. And some of the big greens who were into stopping fossil fuel and saying a nuclear power is a replacement, they're like, nothing happened. Yeah, it's okay. We don't have to worry about it. Andy Padian gave a lecture at a talk about Indian Point. In fact, Joe put Andy Padian's lecture on the internet. Absolutely wonderful.
Frequent speaker.
And he was on my show a month or two ago. One of the top energy experts in the country. And he had to leave a Yankee game early in order to give this talk, and he didn't get to have another beer because he knew he had to give a talk and answer questions, and he was angry at some of the other stuff going on and the way he was organized. But he didn't say anything on Joe's video that is not true. And what he did was he asked everybody if they know how much electricity they use every month. Does anybody here, have you looked at your bill, besides paying it? How many people here know how much electricity you used? And it's something you should look at every month. And what you should do is try to reduce that number. And if you reduce that number, you get more money in your pocket. Now, you're getting paid for reducing the amount of electricity you use. And there's a lot of ways of doing it. And when you reduce the electricity you use, you also reduce the amount of methane that is being burnt in order to make that electricity. And when you reduce the amount of methane that is burnt, you also reduce the amount of methane that has to be transported. So you are lowering your carbon footprint by simply using less electricity.
Are you suggesting everybody cut off their gas?
No.
Yeah, why not?
No.
It's methane.
It's methane, but I'm not telling you not to cook your food. And I'm not going to ever tell you to not cook your food. I'm going to tell you to use less. Notice I didn't say don't use any. I'm saying use less. I remember one time I gave a Connect the Dots talk, and somebody trying to say, are you telling people to use candles? All right? I was like, my thought was, oh, are you an infiltrator? You're working for the utility? And the point is that we waste a lot of the electricity that we buy. All right? If a passive house can be built to use 1/10 the amount of energy of a normal house without costing 1 cent more to buy, and there have been plenty of people who've proven this by making passive houses that cost the same or less. If they only use 1/10, that means 90% of other buildings are wasting that power. They are literally wasting it, and you're buying it. So you're giving them money in order to do that. And easy ways to doing that: convert your lights to LEDs. All right, light emitting diodes are about 1/10 to 1/5 as much as a regular light bulb, 1/2 or slightly less than a complex fluorescent. I happen to like the light of the average LED better than the average CFL. There are really great complex fluorescents out there. They're not all bad. But LEDs are pretty much all wonderful light, and saves a lot of power. Does everybody know somebody who puts like a towel or a rug in front of the door to stop the draft in the winter? Okay, do those same people do that in the summer when they have the air conditioning on? Right? And you should, because the energy that you lose because the heat's going out and you want to save the draft, well, your air conditioning is going out as well. So anybody who does that in the winter should do that in the summer. It's that simple. You're wasting a lot of energy. The heat, your building owner might be paying for. Your air conditioning, you're probably paying for. Another way of saving energy, real easy, is to dust the coils behind your refrigerator. A lot of us, there are models of refrigerators that don't have these, but behind the refrigerator, okay, there's these big coils, all right, and those are the heat exchangers. All right, now how does the refrigerator stay cold, right? It has to take the heat and put it somewhere. So those coils are how the heat gets dissipated out. And like everything, it gets dusty. So you take the dust off. Use your hand, use a damp cloth, use a dust mop, whatever it is you use to dust your CD collection or whatever. Dust the coils. And because there's no dust covering the coils, the heat that it's exchanging will be able to get out easier. Right? So the refrigerator won't have to work as hard. So again, your electricity cost just went down. The other thing is with a fridge, don't push it right against the wall. All right, I know we all live in small apartments, but give the refrigerator space so the heat has someplace to go. All right, if the heat is going up against the wall, it can't go anywhere, and so it's going to sort of hang out with your refrigerator and make it work harder to keep things cool. So you don't have to move it out much. This much. That's enough. An inch or less. Doesn't have to be far, but give it some space. And you'll be amazed at how much electricity you save. Another thing is a power strip. If your appliances, you have a big thick inverter plug, those big thick plugs, right? They use electricity even when whatever they're plugged in is off. Those inverter plugs are still converting AC to DC, so they're still wasting electricity. If your appliance has a display on it, it's using electricity even when it's off. If it uses a remote, it's using electricity even when it's off. And of course it kind of has to, because if you point your remote at it to turn it on, how does it know that you just pointed a remote at it? Right? How does it know? Because it's on. And the people who make your appliances aren't paying your electric bill. They really don't care. They care for you to buy their appliance, but they don't care how much money it costs for you to use the appliance. So if you put those appliances on a power strip, with one flick, you can turn them all off, and they're not using electricity when they're off. And a friend of mine, she kept complaining about her electric bill. And I said, don't complain to me until you put your stuff on a power strip. And so she finally did. She checked her electric bills because she didn't believe me, like some friend. And I said, so how much are you saving? She goes, $50 a month.
Wow. You said take me out for dinner.
And yeah, $50 a month. She lives in Queens, by the way. I know some of you here live in Queens. But we're all Con Ed customers. Somebody at the radio station is complaining about his electric bill. You know, what can I do about my electric bill? Power strip. Oh, my power strips are under my desk and it's too difficult to turn them off. Take them out and put them out from under your desk and where you can reach them. He finally did. Now, he gets a lot of his radio shows ready at home. He does a ton of electric equipment. And $100 a month he was saving.
Nice.
All right. Hey, don't say who it is. We have a tape going. Don't say who it is.
You made a believer out of them.
And oh boy, did I make a believer out of him. $100 a month. And what I like to say on my radio show is, for $50 a month, you can afford to become a member of WBAI. You can afford to become a member of BAI Buddy. You can afford to become a member of New York City Friends of Clearwater, the Nuclear Information Resource Service, Public Citizen, Hudson River Sloop Clearwater. You can join all these great environmental groups when you're saving $50 a month. And you still have money left over to go out for dinner and whatever. So, you know, do that. I've spoken here before, and I've said those things before, and they always bear repeating. Because when Andy spoke in front of 100 and some environmentalists who wanted to shut down Indian Point, and asked them how much energy they were saving, how many LEDs, not too many hands went up. And, you know, how many people know what their electric bill is, not too many hands went up. How many people are using power strips, not too many hands went up. Joe, when he did that, he put his camera around. You could see all these hands not going up.
And Andy got mad.
And Andy got mad. And I was like, yep. But the thing is that he was angry, and people get angry at him for being angry. And it's like, he did not say anything that wasn't true. And, you know, if the shoe fits, wear it. You know, if you resemble that remark, then change it. We can all change that. There's a lot. However, public policy has to be changed. Public policy favors using fossil fuel. It does not favor energy efficient buildings. There are a few city laws on the books that have been put in the last few years. City Law 85, 86, 87. There's a lot of city laws that do address energy, but they don't do it to the extent that those of us in this room at New York City Friends of Clearwater would like to see happen. So we need to push and get them to have energy use into account when buildings are given their permits, their building permits, their operating permits, when a building is performing poorly energy-wise, right? Their permit should be threatened so that they will go better. Boilers in apartment buildings are almost always too big. And one reason they're always too big is because they go, well, whatever the biggest one is, just put it in. Because in order to know what size boiler you need to put into the building, you have to go, well, my square footage of my building is this, right? So the height times the width times the length is this, and then I have to divide, and how many BTUs that does this boiler use? Nobody wants to do the math. That a lot of building codes booklets used to have charts in them so that you could figure out what it was. And when they found that nobody was using the charts and they were just getting the biggest boiler and putting in the biggest pipes, then they said, well, then why are we putting the charts in? Why are we spending the money to print a couple pages with charts? Nobody using them. Andy loves to point, and my show with Andy Padian is available on the WBAI.org website. If you go to my website, if you go to past guests, it's only a few months ago, and I have a direct link to the show with Andy. So he's got all kinds of tips for you, lots of them. And I spent an hour with him, right? And one of the things he's always talking about is water. That you can save so much energy and so much money by reducing the amount of water you use by simply having low flow shower heads, low flow sinks, and low flow toilets. And that's an energy thing besides the hot water of a shower and the hot water of the sink. It's also, energy is needed to pump the water so that when you turn on the faucet, you get water. Right? So the less water you use, the less water has to be pumped. So that saves electricity. And when you save electricity, there's less burning of methane, there's less need for Indian Point. They won't be able to say, we can't replace the power. We don't need the power. We're not using it. Now we've already reduced, because of people like Andy Padian and Lindsay Auden and environmentalists who did switch to complex fluorescent light bulbs and are using power strips, we have reduced the energy use per person in New York City. All right, it has gone down, but the population has gone up. And also, and if you think about the fact that there's so many more electric appliances, how in the world are we using less electricity per person? Because there's enough people who are saving electricity in all these little ways. And we should all, as members of New York City Friends of Clearwater, be those people.
Has Energy Star had a measurable effect?
A major effect. Energy Star has had a tremendous effect. That's why, of course, we have an administration in Washington that wants to get rid of it, right? It's had a tremendous effect on greenhouse gas emissions. New York State is one of the leaders in Energy Star. And
explain what it is.
And Energy Star is simply a label on an appliance that says this appliance uses less electricity than average. And there's often it says exactly how much, and sometimes it doesn't. But when you buy an appliance, get an Energy Star appliance. It will save you money, and especially a refrigerator or an air conditioner. Right, since they are the two biggest uses of electricity in your home, an Energy Star refrigerator or air conditioner will save you a heck of a lot of money. So it's something we should all be doing. And all of this is fueling these hurricanes. I mean, you can't separate climate change, no matter how much mass media wants to separate the climate from aspects of the climate, such as a hurricane. It's there. I thought Dr. Hafer's comment about her analogy with baseball, home runs and hurricanes, was a very good one. And it's one that you can use on people who are not us, right? Because you may have somebody who thinks that, there's no connection. But a lot of those people are going to know about the steroid use in baseball, the performance-enhancing drugs, ruining all those records and hurting your team or helping it, whichever. But the point is that is something people can get their minds around. And so use it to teach people. There's a lot of ways we can teach people. We're the ones that people come to because we know stuff. Right? We go to various talks. There's a speaker at here every month. So we learn a lot of stuff, but we have friends and coworkers and family members who do not go to events like this. So we have to teach them. And we have to feel comfortable in knowing enough about whatever the topic is so that we can teach them. I took a lot of notes on, what an El Nino is and what a La Nina is, and I realized that's not necessary. It affects the climate in a lot of ways. And another example of it affecting the climate, the Russian wheat crop of 2011, right? Because of a La Nina, the jet stream wasn't moving very quickly. Just as the heat waves out west with the La Nina this year, that didn't move, right? Instead of the weather moving across quickly, it stayed hot out there a long time because the jet stream wasn't moving. Well, the same thing happened with the Russian wheat crop in 2011. The jet stream was making it so hot by not moving, and the weather didn't change so that the heat wave didn't go away like it normally would have, that they lost a lot of their wheat crop. So they did not export wheat that year. And who used to get that food? North Africa, the Mideast. What happened in 2011 in the spring? We had the Arab Spring. People were starving. The governments of those countries were saying, you get food, you don't. Well, if you're not getting food, and you have a family to feed, and you're starving, you have nothing to lose in, say, starting a revolution. And so the climate in Russia affected the politics of North Africa and the Mideast. Everything is connected. Right? It's all connected. And of course, later that year, you had Occupy Wall Street. So did the climate of Russia help give us Occupy Wall Street by the inspiration of the Arab Spring? Hard to say, but I don't think it's a coincidence. I really don't. But the point is that did happen. And there are websites that really analyze the jet stream, the Russian wheat crop. I did a whole show with one of those people who had really did a wonderful analysis. And that is why you can't ignore climate change. And climate change is short for global climate change. And I really need to emphasize that too. It's not just climate chaos, it's global climate chaos. What goes on in one part of the world affects another. So the ocean currents along the equator in the Pacific Ocean, going to the Philippines and bouncing back, affect our weather because the hurricanes develop or don't develop depending on what's going on over in the Pacific Ocean. And people get wiped out. And if the grid is shut down, then the nuclear power plant has to shut down. And if it shuts down incorrectly, right, we're going to have a disaster. And if the safety equipment can't stay on for whatever reason that they use to keep it on, we're going to have a disaster. And it's a whole lot better to stop a disaster before it happens than try to do something about it afterwards. And one of the disasters is current global climate chaos. And all of us have a role to play in stopping it in our own lives and in the way we influence our elected officials.
People in our everyday life, whether it be people in our families or people that we talk to and try to convince them about climate change or anything, one of the most common things I get is, well, look, it's not, it just was freezing the other day, so there's no, the climate's not warming. It was cold last night, it snowed yesterday or whatever. It's like, no, you don't get it. It's the oceans that are getting warmer and creating the storms to be worse. And, it's like people find a simplistic way. So how do you answer a simplistic statement by somebody about...
You're confusing weather and climate.
There you go.
All right? Weather is the day-to-day, hour-to-hour change in the weather. That's what weather is. Climate is the accumulation of all of those changes. And so that's what people are confusing. All right? You can have a cold winter day and still be suffering from climate chaos. Secondly, there's more to climate chaos than global warming. And even though that's what all the geoengineers want to talk about, there's other parts of it, such as deforestation, right? As a major part of climate chaos. Deforestation affects our climate in several ways. Wind is created by the uneven heating of the earth, all right? And the uneven heating is caused because some parts of the earth are light and some are dark. So if it's dark, you know this from cars in the summertime. Dark things absorb more energy than light things. So when you have ice on top of the Arctic Ocean, that's reflecting the sunlight. Right? When the ice melts, it's absorbing the sunlight. Earth just got warmer. When you are cutting down forest, it absorbs, because forest is absorbing the sun's energy. Right? Vegetation absorbs the sun's energy in order to grow. So if you cut down that forest, it is no longer absorbing the sun's energy. Secondly, what does it use to grow? Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So that's the greenhouse gas that's no longer in the atmosphere because a plant used it to grow. And by plant, I mean a tree, a bush, a grass, a diatom in the ocean. The four most common living creatures on Earth are all diatoms in the ocean. Of course, you got 70-some% of the Earth is covered by ocean. The things that are going to live there are going to be numerous. So yes, of course the biomass of diatoms is greater. Every one diatom is microscopic. But all of them together are just a massive amount. So that's all absorbing carbon dioxide. If you cut it down, if you burn it, you're giving off carbon dioxide. So you're not absorbing it, you're not absorbing the sun's energy, and you're giving off carbon dioxide. So that's three ways in which deforestation has just contributed to the climate chaos. And because the Earth is not absorbing sunlight the same way it did before, that means the wind patterns are now different than they were before. And if they're different, that means the weather is changing, and altogether the climate is changing. So deforestation, whether in the tropics or in the boreal forests of the north, is changing the climate drastically. So that's another aspect of climate chaos.
Any changes in the Trump administration in a good direction?
What a leading question that is. I'm actually in the process of putting together a show analyzing the current administration in detail. He did stop the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I'll give him credit for that. He deserves a lot of credit for that. But he's trying to undo that credit by what he's doing with NAFTA. And he's trying to make NAFTA as bad as the TPP, but with less countries.
Amy had a question?
Oh, so what happened with the nuclear power plants in Florida that they didn't shut down?
They did, like Turkey Point is near Miami, they did shut that down. And the one further up near, halfway between Cape Kennedy and Miami, there's a nuclear plant there, and they shut that down.
The ones that were in
They did not shut down all the plants that were inland. They did not. I don't know what they finally did. I guess I should have looked up the NIR's website and found out. And then suggest, if you want, how badly you want the information, NIRS.org, the Nuclear Information Resource Service, a wonderful organization. They've been working on safe energy issues for decades, even when it wasn't a sexy thing to work on. They were out there working on it. And they're the ones who did an article on 11 nuclear power plants in Irma's path.
So you talked about wave energy and how it was developed in the U.S. Passive House was also developed in the U.S. in Illinois, I believe, and Germany has 1 out of 10 homes, new homes being built.
You have to build Passive House if you're building a new building.
Both these technologies were from the U.S.
Yeah.
And the U.S. is not using them. Mm-hmm. But one place they are experimenting with verdant or wave energy is Roosevelt Island is an experiment.
Well, that's tidal power. That's not wave energy. That's tidal power.
Oh,
I like to call it lunar power because the tides are caused by the moon.
So verge and wave is different.
Yeah, wave power is the ocean waves smacking in, and the tides, the East River is an estuary, so the tides are going back and forth and back and forth, and so they put what look an awful lot like little wind turbines in the water. They go in one direction and then they turn around when the tide turns. If you go to Roosevelt Island, when you get off the tram, walk north, and it's on the Queens side of Roosevelt Island. When you see a Gristedes supermarket, go behind the Gristedes supermarket to the edge of the water, and there's a big board explaining the tidal energy that's going on there. That was years ago.
How effective is it?
I think Ecologic may have been on at 11 a.m. It was so long ago.
The Dutch had tidal power.
And well, I can talk about Europe a lot. But the tidal power, it was developed partly by the Pentagon, and Cooper Union was involved in the development of that. Verdant Power is a company from the South, and I remember getting a public relations email as a media person that declared the tidal power experiment a success. And they rattled off how much energy they had made and how much they made, per hour and everything else. And yeah, it hasn't gone anywhere. And I sort of did a little calculation about how many rods of little tidal power turbines needed to replace Indian Point, and they would need about 2,000 to replace Indian Point totally. Wind power is cheaper to build than tidal power is, but the people who complain about they don't like the looks of wind turbines, well, tidal power is under the water. You don't see it at all, and they check things like, are fish going to get hurt? No, they avoided it. They just went around it, which means that the seabirds that eat fish, cormorants, didn't get killed either. Everything seemed to be fine.
So what's going to happen with the great experiment? Are we going to have more of it?
So far, I have not heard a single thing. Phone calls I've made are like, no plans. It's kind of weird. It's a policy change that ordinary citizens, like the people in this room, could have an effect on getting done. Remind your local city council person that there are tidal turbines in the East River that have been declared a success. And they make a good amount of power. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if the technology is even better now. If they've made it lighter and stronger, then it's probably going to give you even more energy. Material science is just going incredibly powerfully forward. What they're doing with material science is amazing. And they're figuring out ways of making solar cells without the rare earth elements that China is no longer exporting because they want to use it for themselves. And but there are colleges all over. I first at MIT was looking into replacing those rare earths, and now it's being done in Stanford. Now it's being done by smaller colleges all over the place. I went to somebody at a science fiction convention. Her professor was working on material science replacement for the rare earths and she was at a small college in central Massachusetts. There's a lot of good research being done on this. Be a good idea for a radio show, wouldn't it?
You know anybody with the show?
I don't know. I'll have to look around. Anybody got a mirror?
Is it all Roosevelt Island that is now?
No, it's just a Gristedes supermarket is getting their power and one other thing. And that's it.
Is there a hospital there?
It could be a hospital or part of a hospital. It wouldn't be the whole hospital.
Or there's a green building in Roosevelt Island.
Yeah, I don't remember. It's near the Gristedes.
Yeah.
And the billboard will tell you. It'd be a nice field trip. Talbot and Jeannie, did you ask?
I'm sorry? About this? No, you had asked us about dialogues that we've had with climate deniers.
Yeah.
Okay, and I have actually two people who are like Facebook friends going way back to college who are like, climate deniers that I've engaged with. And one of them in particular I posted recently, an action alert for people to tell their elected officials that the hurricanes were as intense as they are because of climate, and so climate has to be addressed urgently. Okay. And so my friend responds back with the idea that these hurricanes don't prove that there's climate chaos because, it's not statistically, scientifically controlled experiment, yada, yada, okay? And so what I responded back to him is that nobody is saying that these hurricanes are proof of climate change. That's already been demonstrated elsewhere, okay? If you want the scientific studies,
That's a good answer.
Okay? This is an action alert saying these hurricanes were intensified because of going over warmer ocean waters, and so that's why they're so strong, and this is just one more example of why we have to do something about this, okay? So I think maybe he sort of understood what I was saying because he shut up and then pushed back again, okay? And so I know that there are people who are climate deniers because it suits their, their economic, they've got shares in fossil fuels and whatever, but I think there's a lot of other climate deniers who will either engage in this kind of thing, just because they want to be wise Alex, like they suddenly decide, now is the time that I want to talk about the fact that it should be a scientifically controlled experiment, okay? Not when it's about my pet issue, okay? But I think it may also be because it's a defense mechanism. It's a way of people not wanting to connect emotionally with the reality of what's happening and what it means. So they're just looking at it as an intellectual exercise, and they're saying, oh, as an intellectual exercise, you haven't, demonstrated the exact thing that needs to be demonstrated to prove this or to prove that, or this is an action alert, but it's being presented as if it's a proof or something, And so I think somehow there's a disconnect, and I think that's what needs to get addressed, and I'm not sure how we do it. That's something, that I've been thinking about. One of the problems, of course, is with our communication processes, because I have to say, I was a little upset when you mentioned that figure of 82 times worse over a 10-year period is one that, the big greens have been using because they want to avoid dissing methane, okay? Because actually, that's a figure that I've frequently heard in the grassroots groups. We've been using that, and we've been thinking, that's a good statistic to use, okay? And the idea that it's 120 times worse in the immediate, that isn't out there. People aren't hearing that, okay? So a lot of these things, aren't getting out there, and if it's not getting out there even to activists, so we know what's not getting out there to everyone else.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of mental laziness going on things like that, where they just repeat something. So if a big green says it, they repeat it. And they go, well, 86 or 82 times worse in 10 years, that's pretty bad. But for someone who we're trying to convince to join us or to think like us, that's in 10 years. And as soon as you say in 10 years, people are like, well, geez, that's in 2027. I mean, what do I have to worry about it for? And I remember when I kept hearing that number, I'd go to New York City Grassroots Alliance meetings, and I kept hearing that number over and over again. What about now? I mean, it's simple math. If it's 80-something times worse in 10 years and 10 times worse in 100 years, then clearly it's worse now. And finally somebody sent me, I was asking everybody, I was really making a pest of myself, and finally somebody sent me the intergovernmental channel and said, check page, whatever it is. And there it was. But it's not spelled out. And when there's numbers involved, people get uncomfortable. And you've been taught your whole life, either you're good at math or you're not good at math. And working at it and thinking about it isn't going to make you better. Well, working at it and thinking about it will make you better. It's ridiculous that we have such a math and science phobia in the U.S. I mean, it helps one political party over the other, and I think that political party is intense on making sure that math and science, or education in general, it's not in their best interest.
I seem to think that if they don't understand it, then it doesn't apply to them.
Yeah, and I mean, that's why I loved Dr. Abby Hafer's baseball argument, because that is going to reach some people other things wouldn't reach. I remember somebody complaining that he said, oh, well, solar panels lower property value. And I'm like, no, they don't. But a solar lease does lower property values. It's not the solar lowering the property value, it's the lease lowering the property value. If you have solar panels on your home is worth more money than it was before. Because after the mortgage, the biggest bill you have every month is your utility. So if you have solar panels, that bill is less. So people want a house like that. Plus solar panels are cool. And so if you are selling a house with solar panels that you own, the house is worth more money and it sells faster. But if there's a lease and you are tying your new owner to a lease that's not your lease, then it's like, well, I'm not going to pay as much for it. And when a person who seemed like a troll was yelling at a friend of mine on Facebook about how bad solar was, and I pointed that out, he actually said thank you. And he insulted my friend one more time, and then he said thank you and disappeared. So it's little details you have to know. And if you don't know about the difference between solar leases, then ask. And it's like, somebody is claiming that solar energy lowers property values. Is that true? And I'll explain it to you. Or Andy Payton will explain it to you. Or Tom Thompson will explain it to you. Or whatever. I mean, there's Richard Klein had put up solar panels just a few blocks to the west of here. You can see it from the corner of Washington Square, but you can't see it if you're next to the building. So there's a lot of weird nuances of when we're trying to teach people who don't know as much as we are.
Why don't you say, for the sake of the camera, what's the exact corner, street you can stand on to look, to see, to be able to get the right angle to see the solar panels?
The solar panels are halfway between McDougal Street and 6th Avenue on West 4th Street. And if you stand on the corner of Washington Square and look west and up, and it's on the south side of West 4th Street, you can see them. If you stand on the corner of West 4th and 6th Avenue and look east on the south side of West 4th, you can see them. There's giant, these are solar thermal that Richard Klein put up before he even started Quixotic Systems. Richard Klein is really, there were solar pioneers in New York City in the 60s and 70s, but it kind of stopped and started again, and he's one of the pioneers of the current wave of solar people.
You know what I've been thinking? I don't know if it's directly related to hurricanes, but when you hear about all the blackouts and 90% of the power is gone and 100% of the power is gone, and I flashed on the story about Tom Thompson and how
yes.
When we had Hurricane Sandy, the only place that had power was a school that Tom Thompson fixed up with solar energy during
Can we go into more detail on that?
Well, actually, that's just my question is, can we get Tom Thompson to do a story on how we can get, like, the whole island of Bermuda to be now on solar, so we don't care about the electrical lines coming down anymore?
It's an interesting question. Years and years ago, the United Nations had a program of solarizing Haiti. Ooh. And when they solarized Haiti, there were people who could start home businesses for the first time in their life because they had electricity. They had no electricity. They were in rural areas of Haiti. They had no electricity. So suddenly they could have a home business in the evening. Kids could do their homework. And when you're not allowed to do homework is not a thing to be avoided. and they were grateful for it. And what happened was people started stealing the solar panels. And so the UN canceled the project. And I talked to somebody from Haiti about that, and he goes, well, they were looking for an excuse to cancel the project. That's his feeling. And in West Africa, they actually were solarizing West Africa. And in this case, they were much more conscious of making sure the solar panels were secure, so they could not be stolen. And that's what needs to be done. You have to think about the whole area. You can't just come down from United Nations in New York City and
The socioeconomic.
know exactly what to do in Haiti. And so they are learning, and I'm hoping that there's been enough from West Africa, from the good and bad of Haiti. There are certainly solar panels in parts of the Caribbean.
I'd like to hear stories
And
of
yeah,
those
there's
places that maybe still
it's an interesting thought.
Community now in Puerto Rico.
I get some solar magazines. I'm going to have to start searching for articles on them.
Tommy Thompson would know.
He might. His career has kind of taken him on a different path. He no
China
longer.
seems to make most of it, and there seems to be a debate going on right now
There is a.
about who makes them.
Oh boy, is there ever?
Everybody's going out of business.
Yes.
Here.
There-
What's your take on that?
All right. What you're referring to is the government of China has subsidized the manufacture of solar cells in China.
And they have a lot of them out.
And what they're doing is making them very quickly, very cheaply, and very poorly. But not every Chinese company does a lousy job at making solar cells.
Can you back that up?
And yeah, because Tom Thompson, in fact, the very Tom Thompson, does buy solar cells from China, but he knows the difference. All right, he's been in the business for I guess 20 years now, so he knows what he's looking at. All right, if I were to look at the different kinds of solar cells, I may or may not. I may say, yeah, they look different, but I don't know which one's the good one, which one's the bad one. Tom looks at them and goes, yeah. Richard looks at them, yeah. David Buckner, yeah, I know exactly what the difference is. A lot of solar installers who are relatively new to being a solar installer, they don't know the difference. So they just avoid Chinese solar cells altogether. U.S. solar cells tend to be very good. German solar cells tend to be very good. There's a lot of reliably good solar cells for sale, and China has some, but you have to know as much as the experienced solar installers to know the difference, and that's the problem. The story is it's Bayonne High School. One of my favorite stories. They had solar panels put up on Bayonne High School, and when Hurricane Irene hit, the solar panels were tied to the grid. The grid went down. They had no electricity at Bayonne High School. And they said, we're an evacuation center. We need to have electricity. Can you fix it so that when we're making electricity, we get the electricity? So Tom put in a special kind of battery backup that senses what direction the electricity is flowing. So it knew when to turn on and power the building and take the electricity from the roof. When Sandy happened, Bayonne High School was the only place for miles that had electricity. Every emergency worker for miles would go to Bayonne High School to charge their equipment. All right, and people were charging their cell phones. And so those solar panels were saving lives by enabling emergency workers to do their work. And it's a wonderful description of a difference between price and value, because you can't put the value on the lives that those emergency workers saved. So Bayonne went back to Tom and said, hey, put panels on all our schools. And his career took a different path, and I really don't know if a different company put them up. But the point is, that difference between value and cost is something that we should emphasize. And in fact, somebody from the New York City Safe Energy campaign had heard me tell the story at a meeting, and she knew the head of the Education Committee of New York City on the City Council. And she said, "Oh, you got to meet him. Tell him your Bayonne High School story." So I told him the story, and he's like, whips out his card and said, "Email me that story. I need to send that around." And 2 weeks later was the announcement of the 100 Solar Schools program. And I like to think that I helped. And I think the same thing could happen with any of the island nations. After Katrina hit, I got a PR email from a solar company because there was an experimental oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. And when Katrina went through, it was the only oil rig that was still operating because it was operated by solar. And I'm like, oh my God, this is uncomfortable. But yeah, it shows the power of or the reliability of solar energy.
I just want to ask a question not having to do with solar. With all these factory emissions, like from China and all over the world, contributing to climate change, like, is there any plans from any environmental group or any movement to try to cut that back, all those emissions, to control it again? Because I know there were laws in the past, but they're being dismantled by...
I would guess not, but it's possible that there is something going on I just don't know about. But I would hope that if Tom Weissmuller is correct, that the emissions of China cooled the Pacific Ocean enough to stop the El Nino from happening and put in a La Nina, which made us have more hurricanes and more powerful hurricanes, that connection should be made right here in the United States. Because their emissions, their soot, directly affected lives in the Caribbean and in the U.S.
It's 10 after 9, and one wonderful thing about having Ken is that he could probably talk all night.
You keep asking me questions, and I'll give you as many answers as I can.
We do like to have the music portion of our so
I like that too.
Maybe this would be a good time to thank Ken for an incredibly enlightening presentation.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for existing. Never mind that. Thank you for existing so that you can have guest speakers every month like this.